All right, I think we're going to dive right in because I think we're running a minute or two late here. Yeah, I actually just realized before I stepped up here, I'll introduce myself in just a second in my background, but I haven't taught or spoken in front of a group like this, I think, in 3 or 4 years. So, oh, this is a clicker? I think I might just do this if that's all right with you guys. Yeah, I see some pictures. Hey, what's up? I'm super honored to be here. I've moderated many panels and conversations at conferences around the world, but I've never actually presented at one, so this is my first time doing so, and I know a lot of the people in this room, and to do it at a conference like this means a lot to me, so thank you all for being here, and thank you for signing up. I'm going to do the best I can to share you what I've learned about writing about Bitcoin now professionally for about 3 years, writing in general about Bitcoin for 4, but please just stop me and ask questions as we go. I would rather you not sort of be thinking about your question and then waiting till the end to ask it. I'd rather it be a conversation. And I have some examples within the slides. At the end, if we have a little extra time, I'm happy to show some extra examples of my actual writing, and we could dive in a little bit deeper. But I'm just going to provide, just an overview of what I know and some very practical tips on how to approach writing about Bitcoin online, specifically online. So just about me, I was a music journalist from 1999 to 2008. I don't know if you guys know the Wu-Tang Clan. This is Ghostface Killah. I interviewed Ghostface a while back. It was quite fun. This was actually fun. I included this particular piece because does anybody remember MySpace? Yeah, I was asking Ghostface what he thought about MySpace, so now here we are talking about Bitcoin a quadrillion years later, but that's what I used to do, so interviewed a lot of really cool artists. So I was a writing teacher, and that sort of happened by mistake. I never planned to be a university lecturer or anything. I really liked teaching immigrants English, which was my job in New York for a while, so I did my master's degree in linguistics and in ESL, and eventually some certain colleges started asking me to teach writing, so I taught writing for a while. I don't know that to be honest, I don't think of myself as a particularly good writer or teacher. I try to put a lot of effort into it, and I try to focus on the audience, both as a writer and both as a teacher, and I would say that's probably my first tip to you, to actually cite Sabina. Try to do a lot of listening as a writer. I think that's a really good way to approach things. Sabina talked about that with Tando and creating a product, but I think it's also really important as a writer to sort of keep your ear to the ground, to hear what people are really saying, and to then say the quiet part out loud. So I've been writing for a while. I currently write as a part-time contributor for Forbes Digital Assets. I'm the business and political correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine. I've also contributed to CoinDesk. There's actually, I think, I did a Future of Bitcoin series. One of those articles was on Lorraine Marcel from Bitcoin Dada. Another one was on KG, one of the organizers of this conference. I used to do product reviews for an Australian company called Finder.com. And I've been writing my own newsletter about Bitcoin for 4 years. So I started 4 years ago. And I used to host a podcast that I wish I still had time to host called New Renaissance Capital, where I spoke with a lot of people from the circular economies around the world. So I think some context is in order. So we're here at a Bitcoin conference. Sometimes when we put out information about Bitcoin, we tend to kind of be preaching to the choir, and what a lot of us maybe forget is that well over 90% of the world does not understand what Bitcoin is. So if you're going to approach an audience, my suggestion is to approach that audience, to try to find some way to maybe teach Bitcoin from your softball team, your church, whatever other organizations you're in. I think we gravitate towards trying to sort of share something that's going to go viral on Twitter. Sure, that has some value. I do it myself all the time. But reaching beyond that, getting beyond sort of the Bitcoin choir, I think is really where a lot of the value is to be had. So again, I said resist just writing pieces that will get you praise from the Bitcoin believers out there. So one of the things that I think is really, really important, and I have an example from someone who's in the room with us here, Nolin Sumba, who's a seasoned Bitcoiner at this point. I think she did a really cool thing. I recently read a piece that she posted on Medium, and I found this part really refreshing. She talked about this first aha moment that she had when she was using the Lightning Network. And this was in early 2022. So this is only, 3 years ago or so? And she talks about this idea of not even knowing what a Lightning invoice was when someone asked her for one. So someone asked her for this lightning invoice. She didn't even know what it meant. Now, the first thought I'm thinking is sort of like, yeah, I probably didn't know what that meant in 2022 was either. But there's a lot of power in admitting this, because now when a reader reads this, they think to themselves, oh, I don't know what that is, or I don't know, I've heard all these terms too. I shake my head and I pretend to know what they mean now so that I don't look silly in front of people. But it is really important to be, I wouldn't say to be vulnerable in the writing, but to be honest about what you don't know and what you do know. Someone gave me advice a few years ago. They say to kind of write to yourself 2 years ago, like write to yourself to what you understood about Bitcoin 2 years ago. So like to what you didn't understand about Bitcoin 2 years ago. Something to keep in mind. So that's the other point that I made there. But Nolene, I thought that that was a really good thing to include there. And I would say if you're going to lean into anything, lean into that personal experience when you write versus just fix the money, fix the world, Bitcoin fixes everything, right? We have these slogans in Bitcoin that just get sort of like mindlessly repeated, and they don't get repeated with any nuance, right? Without nuance, without sort of a human experience tied to what Bitcoin is, I think it feels like a slogan to people, and I don't think it has as much meaning to people. So just something to consider there. So I can't get into all of the types of pieces that you can write in Bitcoin, but I kind of broke it down into 4 different genres, at least that I write in. So there's news, and I have some links here, and I'm going to share these slides as well so that you can go and actually click on these pieces afterwards. I'm going to make you subscribe to my newsletter to do that. It's free, but I'm going to share them via my newsletter. So there's news. News just has to be about 250 to 600 words. And the reason that I say this with words is because for me, sometimes if I have anxiety about writing something, it helps to conceptualize, okay, I just need to get to like 500 words here. I'm going to write about this, this, and this. So I create a mental framework. But having that sort of, knowing how many words I'm going to put on paper, I think is helpful oftentimes. Takes. This is something that we recently developed at Bitcoin Magazine, something that has gotten me in a decent amount of trouble lately. So I recently wrote a piece. Oddly enough, it was the most popular piece on Bitcoin Magazine's site in January. It was called Don't Buy the Bitcoin Dip. Now, do I hate Bitcoin? Am I telling you not to buy Bitcoin? No, that's not what I'm doing. What I was saying was simply that we've been in a bull market since late 2022, and Bitcoin was $15,000 2 years ago. It's now $100 and whatever thousand US dollars. And I'm just saying be cautious. Keep dollar cost averaging. I'm not telling anybody to sell their Bitcoin, but I did it to be a bit provocative and to get people's attention. And then within the piece, I introduced the idea of the 4-year cycle. Bitcoin's price is going up right now. It might even go up a lot more throughout the year. Chances are it will turn down come the new year. This second piece that I wrote here, I don't recommend doing this stuff unless you want to be disliked. Michael Saylor actually disinvited me from his New Year's Eve party because he read this piece, and that was that. Do I regret writing it? I don't. Michael Saylor laid out his plan for Bitcoin to just be capital, to not be something that the world should use as money, and that the whole world should adopt US dollars instead. I vehemently disagree with that perspective. I wrote that. But these are particularly opinion pieces. This, I think, is a good place for people to start, and I'm going to talk about these a little bit today. How-to guides or reviews, I think, are really, really helpful, especially to get newbies used to using the technology. So I think that there's a lot of companies that are willing to hire. My first job was my first full-time paid job in this space was working for a company called Finder, where I would review Bitcoin and sometimes broader crypto products. So like a Ledger hardware wallet or Kraken crypto exchange or something like that. But I would say for people who are a little bit nervous to sort of put their voice out there, to write an opinion piece or to be writing news, doing product reviews is kind of neutral, and you can know that it's helping people, so it might be a good place for you to start, and I'll show you some examples of that. Features are a little bit tougher. This usually includes doing interviews with people, and I could do a little bit of it. Features, though, I say keep it to about anything you write. I would say do not go over 1,500 words. And I think mentally that's sort of a good thing, because if you're writing a 1,500-word piece, maybe you can break it into like 3 or 4 300-word sections. But the data shows that after 1,500 words, you lose like 95% of your readers. So just something to keep in mind, and I'll touch on that again. I would say if you do feel that you're writing a piece on someone or a situation that is very special or interesting, go for it. So this piece, I contacted Maya Parbho, who's running for president of Suriname, running on the premise of putting her country on a Bitcoin standard. And I just wanted to speak with her a little bit about her Bitcoin plans. And then she got into how her father was murdered when she was 12 years old for speaking out against corruption in the country. And then she got into this whole long string of controversies and everything else, and no one had published this already. So I decided to give up that weekend and write a 5,000-word piece. I don't do that often, and I don't recommend that people do that often because it's tiring. I only do that on a handful of occasions. One of the actual occasions, Janet from Gridless is here. I love the Gridless story, so I took some time to tell that story in greater detail. Sebastian Gospelou from Big Block Data Center, who does Bitcoin mining in the Congo. I took some time to tell that story in greater detail as well. But again, you, as a writer, writing is hard. And you have to conserve your energy if you don't want to burn out doing this stuff. I know there's educators in the room, and I know that everybody knows what it's like to put themselves into this work. Writing is no different in this regard, and you want to make sure to preserve your energy so that you can keep doing it. You don't just want to do a lot of it within a year, burn out, and then hate the work. So now I'm going to get into some practical tips. One of the things I asked one of my favorite writers when I asked what sort of tips to share, he said, when possible, don't write. Make a video instead. So I'm not saying that to dissuade you from writing, but if possible, and I'll talk about this, you know, if you're going to write something, if you can make a video in conjunction with it, people tend to consume video footage more than they consume writing. But I would also say if you're going to make a video, make sure that the subtitles are in that video so that people can read along. This actually proves it helps not only for those who might be hearing disabled, but just to help get attention for the video as well. Another thing that I learned while writing for Forbes, so get to the point immediately. Sometimes we want to sort of like come in with a hook, right? We want to tell a story. It's hard in this day where you have all of the internet is just fighting for your attention. Right? So like I gave an example here. I wrote a piece on the Oslo Freedom Forum this year, and I very quickly, within a kind of long sentence, summarized what was happening at the Oslo Freedom Forum that year. When you look at the data on what people actually read when it comes to what you publish online, they spend about 45 to maybe 90 seconds actually reading what you've written, which means they're either skimming for the subtitles or the H2s, those are like the different headings, or they're just reading basically what we would say is like above the fold, what's immediately on their screen or on their phone. So it kind of sucks that that's the case. You know, we labor away sort of writing these pieces we put our heart into, and then to find out that people are kind of just perusing them, it's a little bit painful. I mentioned this before, that most people will not read pieces that are over 1,500 words, and I just mentioned this now. So 45 to maybe 90 seconds. So the one thing that you definitely want to do with your work is break it up using H2s and H3s, which I will discuss in a second, but they're basically just subheadings. So you have your headline and then breaking it into headings. If you write a 1,000-word piece and it's not broken up, people are going to lose interest. They're going to glaze over. So just keep that in mind. So another thing, and Google actually rewards this, is that when you include screenshots, like for example, if you're doing a how-to and you don't include screenshots, that is not going to index as well on Google. So for example, like let's say we have Muddy and he's trying to show someone how to use Machankora online. You want to take a picture of what you actually did as you're explaining it and include those all the way down. When people then Google how to use Machankora, his piece on it will come up at a higher ranking on Google than a piece that doesn't include screenshots or any images. Another thing to keep in mind, smart brevity. So I'm not going to get into it. I have the link here, and as I said, I will share these slides. But smart brevity was a term, I believe it was Axios, a major news outlet, created it. Brevity means be brief. Smart means basically don't water down what you're saying, but distill what you're saying. Say it in a sentence versus in a paragraph. That's very, very difficult to do. It takes a while to do it. I think from an advertising perspective, one of the best companies that does this is actually Azteco. I actually had I looked at this morning. Azteco does a really, really good job of just having these 1-sentence, 2-sentence slides. So if you're sort of like, how can I say this easier? Sometimes I look at Azteco advertisements, and I'm like, okay, I sort of get inspiration for how I can simplify what I'm trying to say. So shout out to Azteco on multiple fronts. I love Azteco as a company. So scannable, digestible, and memorable. The memorable part is hard, and that just takes time. Another thing I highly, highly, highly recommend, when possible, write to your curiosity. I used to do these product reviews, and I used to literally fall asleep at my desk in the middle of the day. I was just so bored. It was not my favorite thing to do, but I was also very grateful just to have a job working, writing about Bitcoin, so I wasn't going to give it up. But at that same job, they then asked me to start doing guest pieces for NASDAQ, which is a bigger, broader finance site. They're like, oh, could you do our Bitcoin, opinion pieces for NASDAQ? And that livened me up. So I realized I'm better at writing features and news than I am at writing how-to guides. That's going to be different for everyone. So just figure out what you like and try to do more of that. I think it'll make you, it'll just make you enjoy the work a little bit more. But also writing to your curiosity, what I would say is this: you might get assigned something, or you might have to write about something that you don't really understand, but that you want to understand. Don't shy away from that because you don't fully understand the thing, right? Write as much as you can understand. You can provide other links and other ways to sort of help people understand the topic more, or you could just simply share what you do know about the product. My suggestion is do not start including information that you would not be able to truly explain to someone else, meaning don't start using technical language that you wouldn't be able to actually, that you don't really understand yourself. Write it in a way where you're fulfilling, you're sharing what you do understand, you're sort of helping people learn as much as you possibly can, then providing other resources after that. Another big thing here is considering what do I need to know, or what does the audience need to know, more than what do I want to say. You might really like a product and really want to point out something specific about that product if you're writing about it, but if the audience doesn't really need to know, if that's not really pertinent, and sometimes an editor will tell you that, then try to stay away from it. That can be a little bit tough because even if you're just writing a product review, we want to be expressive. It's just the way we are. We like to share information with people. We like the process of educating other people. But keep that in mind, that you do sort of, what do I need to know, or what am I offering the market, is another way to say it. This is something that I taught my students over and over and over. Has anyone ever been in school and written a paper where they wrote this thing and you're like, yeah, that kind of sounds deep, right? That sounds deep, but then you think about it and you're like, what am I even talking about, right? What's happening here? Ambiguity is the one thing you want to try to erase from your writing. So ambiguity means what you have written can be interpreted in a vast amount of ways. Bitcoin is complicated enough. It's complicated enough. If you're using ambiguous terms, like I used a dynamic new hardware wallet that, or a dynamic new signing device that blah, 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 right? If you haven't been specific, there's a good chance, if you're not being specific and actually getting to the point of what you want to say, you're confusing the audience even more. Someone said, be clear instead of trying to be cute, instead of trying to be clever, let's say. And then another thing to keep in mind is that every piece doesn't have to be everything. When I wrote my first trial piece for Forbes, my motivation was like, okay, I'm going to write like the greatest piece. It's going to include every fact. It's going to do, and they were just like, yo, like take it down a notch. Like let's just focus on this one point right here. And there's something liberating about that, because once you just focus on that one point, you realize, well, I still have all of this left to say. So now I can write a second piece, a third piece, a fourth piece. And one of the things I like about the new model at Bitcoin Magazine is they tried to keep our takes to like 300, 400 words. So it's almost like one extended thought. Putting one thought out there, it's bigger than a tweet. It's not much bigger than a tweet, but you're putting a thought out there, and then you can follow up on that thought in another piece. And that's also a good way to keep the conversation with the audience going. Especially, Sabina, I mentioned you earlier, if you're listening to the audience and sort of responding to what people are saying. Some companies will give you a brief or an outline. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to read all of this out loud, of course, but they will literally say, here's what we're looking for. So the company Finder used to do this. They had a separate team that would say, here's what the title is going to be, here's what the deck is going to be, the deck is the subtitle, and then those are the H2s. So the H2s are your subheadings, H3s are the headings below that. And this is actually great. You can also make one of these for yourself if it helps. It literally says, in the first section, we want a 1 to 3 sentence introduction. In this section, we want this. You can do it in 1 to 2 sentences. So if you're a bit more mathematical, or if you get overwhelmed at the idea of writing a full piece, break it down for yourself. Just break it down. One of the things that I do, like this week I have to write a piece that's unrelated to this conference. It's 1,500 words. I don't want to write it. I want to feel the conference vibes. I want to write about this, but I have to write it. So I've made a commitment to myself to go back to my Airbnb, write 300 words a night, and each one of them is just going to be one of the H2s for the piece. That's it. It's less overwhelming that way. It takes up less of my energy that way. Something to keep in mind. Some companies will do this, some don't. Some writers like outlines, some don't. That's up to you. Again, H2s and H3s, just to reiterate, these are just subheadings. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of making something digestible. When you're writing a paragraph, usually, when I was taught a paragraph, in school they say a paragraph is like 3 to 5 sentences. On the internet, a paragraph is 1 to 3 sentences. Some people might disagree with me. The reason for that, though, is because while you are writing on a computer, most people are reading what you have written on a phone. So when your paragraph is now 10 sentences long, the person's just scrolling like, okay, when does this thing end? Instead, if it's only 1 to 3 sentences long, they do it, they digest that chunk of information you gave them in the paragraph, and then they move on to the next paragraph. I fought against this when someone taught me it, and then once I embraced it, it's super, super liberating. And again, it just helps to sort of think about the piece in chunks as well. I'll go over this slide, but I'll stop there just for questions if anyone has. This is really, really important, the active voice. So think about when you're writing, who is doing the thing, right? Who is doing the thing, not who is the thing being done to. It burdens the work. So for example, I use BitNob as an example here. BitNob sells Bitcoin to its customers versus Bitcoin is being sold on BitNob. You will know that you're using the passive voice when you're using terms like is being. It's happening to something else. You don't want to do that. It makes the writing harder to get through. So that's super important. Google rewards the use of the word I. When I went to school, teachers would never say, never use I in academic writing, never use I. Well, 1, this is not academic writing. 2, when Google sees I, it interprets that as you have experience with this thing, so you're an expert. You've used this product before, so people should be listening to you. You're not just copy and pasting information about the product from the internet. So using I is actually a good thing. Another thing is also when you address the audience, using you, speaking to them. So when I worked for Finder, they got us into this habit of writing in a conversational tone, as if you were telling your friend about something. So when you're speaking to your friend, you say, okay, first you do this, then you do this. And I would do a lot of that. So here's what you need to know about the spot Bitcoin ETFs. Buy Bitcoin, don't buy the spot Bitcoin ETFs. Which Bitcoin ETFs should you buy? I had to write about some stuff I don't really love. It is what it is. So using you is really, I and you, really, really important. I'm probably talking fast and rambling here. Does anyone have any questions thus far? Okay. We'll keep going. Please, yeah.
What type of thing do you enjoy writing most?
I have come to, I shouldn't say that. I have come to enjoy voicing my opinion because what I tried to do is, the reason I wrote the Don't Buy the Bitcoin Dip piece is because what happens, okay, Bitcoin drops from 108,000 to 95,000. Everyone's just chanting, buy the dip, buy the dip. I get worried because if you're new to Bitcoin and everyone's chanting buy the dip, then all of a sudden you're going to put all this money in, maybe more than you should be putting in, instead of maybe dollar cost averaging over time. And what I like about doing the opinion work is that I can add nuance to the slogans, because I get very nervous about the slogans. I think there's too much cheerleading, there's too much Bitcoin saves the world, fixed it, and I think that we need to talk a little bit in a bit more nuanced way. And in the opinion pieces, I share my own personal experience where I say like, hey, here's what happened to me when I followed that advice. It really hurt when the bear market came back around. So I think that stuff is really important, and I try to be the person that I wish I found when I got into Bitcoin. So those pieces, they excite me to write. That, and when I find, again, I'll shout out to Janet from Gridless, When someone tells me a beautiful story, like the gridless story, there's moments I'll be writing these stories and I'll break down into tears. I mean, there's really such beautiful human beings in this space. Many of them are here with us, that it's truly an honor to share those stories, and I can't believe that more people aren't sharing them. So I'm excited to be one of the few people on planet Earth that has a bigger platform to sort of tell these things. So the features and then the opinion stuff are my two favorite, but thank you for asking. This is really, really important. Repurpose content. So when you create something, let's say you've written a 500-word piece, you can now turn that piece into a video. Then you could turn that video into shorts. One of the things that people do is they make a lot of content and they don't milk the content that they've made enough. Like right now, I'll be honest, I'm frustrated. I do an interview every week with the founder of a Bitcoin company. And I have all of this great video footage that the team at Bitcoin Magazine doesn't want to publish. It's not professional enough. I'm not a lighting professional nor a videographer. I use the video to make the article, but I don't end up using the video, and I feel like what a waste. I have all these amazing conversations with people that we could just put up on the YouTube channel. They don't want to do it. I don't have control over that. But one of the things I did have control over, when I was doing my podcast, I was having all of these amazing conversations with people across the continent, across Africa, but also Latin America, Southeast Asia, other parts of the world. And I kept hearing a similar theme, and this theme was anyone at the movie last night, Unbankable? And it was, what is the West going to learn from Africa? And I got goosebumps last night watching the movie, because that's why I wrote this piece. I called it Africa, the New Land of the Free, to purposely be provocative in the sense that what's happening here, even some of the gray area, like Oken talked about in Namibia, the government they just sort of let you use Bitcoin if you want. And I think it's similar from what I've heard in a lot of different African contexts. So what I noticed was, like, in the United States, in New York, I can't use Strike, I can't use Swan, I can't use River, I can't use Kraken. I'm not permitted to use any of these services. I can't use Wallet of Satoshi, I can't use Phoenix Wallet. So I can't use any of these things that people around the world are now using. So from a Bitcoin perspective, what I was witnessing was like, wow, people across Africa are using all this technology I wish I could use. And the great irony there is I live in the state that's home to the Statue of Liberty, right? It says the land of the free on this thing, and I can't use any of the newest freedom technology that the world has to offer. So what I did is I took all of these interviews I did, and I took different quotes from people's in the interviews, and I went to Bitcoin Magazine. This was the first piece I ever wrote for them. It was unpaid. And I said, look, I've been interviewing all these people from around Africa. I would really love to turn this into a piece. And they said, great. I showed them my sources. And it was also a good thing because it gave me an opportunity to then put a link to my podcast in an article for Bitcoin Magazine. That's called a backlink. So now people in Bitcoin Magazine are reading it, going to my podcast. Plus, I'm letting the people on my podcast. It was a small podcast. Now I'm helping to amplify their voices. They're able to now be a part of a piece in Bitcoin Magazine, etc. Another thing that I do when it comes to repurposing content, I write a newsletter every week, and not a lot of the content in that newsletter is new. So what I do is I take all of the pieces I've written. This is just like a section of my newsletter. In the newsletter, I give a brief introduction to one of the pieces I've written. I provide an image. You can click on the image if you want to read the piece, and then sometimes I include a quote from the piece, and that's just in the newsletter. So I'm taking what I've already written over the course of the week and then repurposing that in the newsletter. And what happens there is, like, I know there are certain parts of the piece that to me are more interesting. Now I can give that to my audience directly. If they don't have time to read the entire piece, I can still do that. Plus, Bitcoin Magazine is happy that I'm sharing through. There's a few hundred people who subscribe to my newsletter. So now they're getting more exposure as well. So it's a win-win. But wherever you can repurpose content, do that. Instead of making too much content and burning out, repurpose the content in different contexts and different forms. You will be asked to write about things that you don't like if you're working for a company. So I don't like Ledger. I'll say that out loud. To people who don't know, I think this is public knowledge. I met with the CTO of Ledger. I asked him directly if they have the private keys to the users' devices, and he said yes. I felt sick for about a month after that. So I still had to write about Ledger for my job. So what did I do? So I came here and I included a paragraph here that basically said, I wasn't permitted to share what I just shared out loud, and I don't know if I still am, so whatever. But I said, mind you, Ledger devices haven't had any recorded security breaches, but the software is closed source. So this means that it's not open to independent scrutiny, and you must place some degree of trust in the manufacturer. Read our full review on the pros and cons. And then I also, in another section, said if you are going to use a Ledger, you should use it in a multi-sig setup. You should use it as one of many devices. So while I couldn't explicitly say what I wanted to say, I figured out a way to basically say if you're going to use this thing, here's the safest possible way to do it. And I gave the people the information they needed to make the decision, as much information as I could. A lot of stuff like this happens. You find out about some secrets or some things in the space that are quite disturbing. It's up to you how to present that to the audience. Like, for example, now if Ledger asked to advertise in my newsletter, I would say no immediately. It wouldn't even be a question. Things that are really, really important. So again, this talk is about writing online, and search engine optimization is a real thing. So when you write online, if people don't find what you've written, it's really disheartening, right? You write this piece, you put all this effort into it, you think it's great, and then you find out, maybe you look at the stats and like 30 people have seen it, and they spent like 30 seconds looking at it. So you have to think about search engine optimization. The H2s and the H3s that I talked about, Google searches for those as well. So when you make your H2s and your H3s, your subheadings, Google is indexing for those as well. So you don't just get an opportunity with your headline to get to page 1 on Google, but with your H2s and your H3s as well. So keep that in mind. Also, this is an adaptation of, I first taught this course for Bitcoin Data, or this lesson on writing. So you want to index really, really well as well. So if you have a website, you want to be, if you have a blogs or articles section, that's great. If you have a how-to section, that's great. Google pays attention to the way that you index. And if your indexing is kind of sloppy, they'll penalize you, so people will not find it as easily. Another thing that's really important, and this is something that I'm going to I've spoken with some people about this. Again, shout out to Janet. She recommended that I do this, and it's something that I want to do. I'm going to start co-publishing pieces with people for a few different reasons. One, there are so many beautiful stories happening in the Bitcoin space. I get pitched like 1,000 of them a day. My brain feels like it's going to explode, and my gut feels like I'm going to go to the hospital at any given moment. So I can't do it all myself, so I've spoken with some people. I'm going to start co-publishing. There are benefits to that. One, for the person who might be new to writing, they get to publish with my name, which gives them some extra exposure because Google is more familiar with my name because I've published 1,000 articles on Bitcoin. But whenever possible, one of the things we used to do at Finder, we would include who it was written by, who it was edited by, and then who it was reviewed by, because now you're getting Google to index for all those names, right? So all those names are there, and it helps out. So for example, there was someone who I just pitched a piece to, where I said okay, you write that piece, I'll edit it with you, and I'll add a little bit to it myself. Now we'll co-publish it. It's a win-win sort of situation, but this stuff is important, and I know you see the word crypto there. You could hate me. I had to review this stuff. It is what it is. Another thing, create a bio for yourself. If you plan to be a writer, Google is looking for your bio as well. So here, and actually, one of the things, I didn't change this, I apologize. I said I write about Bitcoin adoption around the world. It's actually better, we just found this out, this is the new Google update. It's actually better that says Frank Corva writes about Bitcoin adoption around the world, because if Google is looking for my name, that helps. And then having a bit of a bio. This is usually, for the biggest site that you end up writing for, this is what will first pop up in Google, and it does help sort of give you a bit more of a presence on the internet. I used to think this was sort of nonsense, but it also is a really good exercise in getting you to realize what you want to actually write about and why you write about that thing. So it's a good exercise as a writer to keep this in mind. I have this slide in here, and I pretend, yes, please, yeah. That's a great question. This is my Forbes bio. This is just for Forbes, but I have a separate bio for Bitcoin Magazine, for Forbes. So I have different beats, we say, in journalism. So for Forbes, I cover Bitcoin adoption around the world. For Bitcoin Magazine, I'm their business and political editor. So there's some overlap. But these are just for that. So for LinkedIn, Does LinkedIn have a bio section? I probably should look into that as the writing teacher today, right? I have not. Wherever there is a bio section, I would include one, if that answers the question. Yeah, so I don't know if I have one on there. I should check, though. Yeah, good question. This is the one thing I'm really bad with. We all take shortcuts around certain things. I don't do enough research on SEO. So SEO, there's two free ways to do this: Google Ads, Keyword Planner, and then keyword.io. The reason I say this is it's really, really important. So my background is teaching, and I was a social worker. And there's a phrase in both of those fields called meeting people where they're at. And I think we all understand that with Bitcoin, right? We don't meet someone and start talking about Austrian economics or blockchain technology. Some of us do, and then we watch the person we're talking to walk away from us because they're like, why are you doing this to me? So the reason that SEO is important and the reason that headlines are important is because let me put it this way. So the most searched for thing with Bitcoin, which headlines do you think get the most traction in Bitcoin? I'm curious. Price. There we go. The price. So the best thing you could write is Bitcoin is going to 1 million, Trump, Michael Saylor, blah, 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 and you'll get a quadrillion views. What you have to get clever at is figuring out what those most searched for keywords are, writing a headline with sort of like class, and then actually offering value. So you can play the headline game to some degree. I wouldn't abuse it. But then obviously offer value. You don't just want to create clickbait. So if you use something like Google Ads, you just kind of search in here, and it'll tell you how many times this word is being searched for. So what's happening is Google is saying this is what people are looking for. The more important thing here, though, is that you might realize that using, this isn't true, but I'll use it as an example. You might realize that using BTC in your headline is more searched for than Bitcoin. And then you say, okay, well, I'll just use BTC then because now more people will find it. I don't think that's true. More people are probably searching for Bitcoin. But it'll basically show you which words are coming up. So it's like using a thesaurus or like a dictionary or something like, it's like a resource that tells you what people are looking for, which helps you to sort of choose the right words in the headline. Another thing I didn't include here. Let's say I'm doing a review of this conference. If I want people who are searching for adopting Bitcoin, let me think of a better example than that. Let's say I'm doing a review of, let's say it is the conference. You want to have the words that you want people to be searching for as close to the beginning of the headline as possible. So I'm not going to say South Africa's Cape Town hosts adopting Bitcoin conference. I'm going to say adopting Bitcoin Cape Town comes to South Africa, right? I'm going to put that in the beginning of the headline. It's going to help people. It's going to help Google index for it better and help people find it more quickly. Another thing, if possible, include data in your pieces. Data Wrapper is a free server. It's a free service. It's a really easy way to make graphs. I mean, it's not really easy, but you'll get used to it pretty quickly. People really like graphs, and I'll say there's another reason why that's good. That's the kind of stuff people will retweet. They want to look smart. They say, here's a graph of this, right? And then they link back to your page. You created that graph. So I was really against this. I get sort of nervous around data stuff, but my last job showed me how to do this. It's a free service. It also allows you to do, the service even allows you to do like branding of the chart. So even if they don't link back to your thing, like if Bitcoin Data makes a chart of like the amount of women in Kenya who are using Bitcoin is going up, you can put your brand in the corner. And this kind of stuff I think is powerful. Again, it's a good way to show, not tell, and get your brand out there as well. So yeah, important stuff there. There are free tutorials on how to use this on YouTube. Doesn't take too long. This is really, really important, and I do this even less than SEO work, but this is really important. As I said, so we sit at our computers, we write these pieces, we kind of think people are going to be reading them the same way that we're writing them, on the same sort of bigger screen. That is not the case. The data shows that tons and tons more people read on a phone than they do on a computer screen. So if you're using Google Chrome to write something, you can literally do these things here. So I think you right-click on the page, you scroll down, you click Inspect, and then you can click on Laptop plus Mobile, and then left there's a button Elements here. And again, I'll share all these slides so you have this. But figuring out a way, and even if you just Google how to review for mobile on YouTube, you'll find plenty of tutorials. I recommend doing this because sometimes even the way you think the page is going to look, when you look at it on a horizontal screen, it will get radically altered on a vertical screen. And aesthetics matter. So the way something looks matter. If the presentation of it isn't great, people might just sort of scroll past it. So if you've put all of this work into doing the actual writing, and then the aesthetics turn people off, that's a shame. So again, I should do this more than I do. Something to keep in mind, though. The idea that I had for the Don't Buy the Bitcoin Dip piece, it's obviously a very ironic piece to write for Bitcoin Magazine. Experiment with different ideas like that. I'm not saying don't just write clickbaity stuff, but this, like I said, it was the most read piece on Bitcoin. My editor sent me this last night. He's like, congratulations, you had the most views on Bitcoin Magazine. I'm like, Don't Buy the Bitcoin Dip had the most views on Bitcoin Magazine. It's like, okay. So the reason I say that is because, let me put it this way. Has anyone ever tweeted something, it went viral, and you're like, really? That? Like, that was the thing? After all, like, the stuff that I think about? So it's sort of like in football, right? Not American football, real football. Like, you have to take a lot. You have to take a lot of shots on net to score. You don't just hope that your one score goes in. Try different things. At the same time, don't just put nonsense out there. Don't because people will very quickly start associating you with like, oh, that's just clickbait or this. Play the long game. Bitcoin lowers your time preference. Be a writer that also makes people feel the same way. It's something that they want to follow, something they want to be engaged with. And on that note, people always ask me, like, oh, but can't you use ChatGPT to make your job easier? You can, if you want your writing to sort of read mechanically. I do use it once in a while, so I gave an example here. I did an interview with this guy, Felix Maradiaga from Nicaragua. Felix is an activist. This was like a proper on-camera interview for Bitcoin Magazine. And they were like, okay, can you write an article about it as well? And I was in the middle of something else, and I was like, okay, for this, I'm going to take the transcript. I'm going to put it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT, give me an 800-word piece based on this transcript, because the real thing here is that I'm not really trying to get people to read the article as much as I'm giving them a preview of what is in the video. So when you do have video content, you could use ChatGPT to turn the transcript into an article and then just take little chunks of that. But I would never just use ChatGPT without editing it, without adding your own voice to it, without making changes to it. It's a tool. It can help you summarize things. But when you just publish with ChatGPT, there's a lot of that sort of content out there. It might work in the short term to get some clicks, to get some views, but ideally you're sort of over time establishing a relationship with your audience if you're writing. So be careful abusing it. Yes?
What platform do you use? I see that you are on Nostr, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about publishing on Nostr.
Great question.
But Substack is your main thing.
If I had to, for me, Substack. But now it's a great question. I just took. Let's go back to repurposing content. On Nostr, you can now use Yakihone or Highlighter. There's long form. Like most people think of Nostr and they think of Primal or Damus like Twitter, but there's now places to publish long form on Nostr, and that automatically indexes to your Nostr feed. So I take my Substack article now, I literally copy and paste it into a long form on Nostr. I end up getting, a few thousand sats for it on Nostr. So I should have included that, but Yakihone, there's a few of them. Highlighter and Yakihone are the two most popular ones. So if you want to make a note, I highly recommend getting started there because there are not a lot of people using it. People will zap you just because you're creating content and creating long-form content in that space. And a lot of people on Nostr have told me, like, please don't share your Substack link here. Please just share it on Nostr directly. So there's more of an appetite for that happening. And I would say if you want to writing a 500-word, 600-word long-form piece on Nostr right now is an amazing market to get started in. It's a great place to get started.
Is it still, although that's not the 90% of people who haven't heard of Bitcoin,
Get it?
your audience is going to be slightly different?
That's a great point. And So the reason I've just did this with my first Substack piece, and it was enough where there was enough interesting information in there where it sort of worked for people who aren't as familiar as it did for people on Nostr. The reason I didn't publish the piece after, because I was like, okay, this is a little too simple for the Nostr crowd. The Nostr thing, I would say, is more for the sake of, I think that's where the internet is going. I think that's even where the quote-unquote normies will be eventually. So establishing your presence now is like establishing your presence on YouTube in whatever, early 2000s or something. But you're absolutely right, and that's a very, very different audience than even Substack. Substack are the people who like don't read anything else I do. They're like, I mean, at one point, like aunts and uncles, people like that who first started reading my work. So it is a little bit of a different audience, but I do recommend getting started on Nostr if you want to build an audience where I think the internet is going. One of the things people do a lot for me, and I can't even respond to all of the emails, is like, Frank, can you edit my work? I was a teacher. I used to have to edit about 2,000 pages of work per semester, and I would spend my whole Saturdays doing that. It's traumatizing. It's traumatizing. It's a lot. So I have a few simple tips for you. Don't publish your work without sharing it with a handful of people. You do not need a professional editor, though. You can just simply ask these questions. Where did I lose you? What got boring? What was ambiguous? What don't you understand? Asking people those questions, you'll very quickly realize, and you'll probably get similar responses from them, where your writing just stopped connecting with people. And that's most important. That's more important than grammar, in my opinion. That's more important than a lot of technical attributes. You just want to learn how to keep people's attention, and the best way to learn if you're doing that or not is to see if you're keeping people's attention, to ask them if you're keeping their attention. Something that a friend of mine said, she was like, I'm going to brush my teeth while reading your piece and see if like it keeps, like I'm going to do something almost while I'm doing this. And I wrote a few drafts of it. It was actually my trial piece for Forbes. And it was when she had the final time that she brushed her teeth and was like, yeah, this was really easy to read. That's when I published it. That's when I sent them, and it ended up being accepted. So having someone sort of do it without focusing all their attention on it, how easy was it for them to get through? Like, you're trying to make this information more accessible to people. It's important to be able to do that. So the thing. So yeah, this is another important thing too. You will get your heart broken if you start writing pieces you really care about, and people, editors are going to kind of take pieces of that piece out that you really don't want taken out. So this was a piece I wrote. It was part of the CoinDesk series that I wrote on the future of Bitcoin. And the original title for this piece, and I begged them to do it, was Lorraine Marcel, Bringing African Women to Bitcoin. So that's different than bringing Bitcoin to African women, but because of SEO, they wanted Bitcoin closer. The reason I wanted it to say African women to Bitcoin is because there's women, there's now Dada devs, and there's these women doing work in the Bitcoin space, and I thought that was almost a more interesting part of the story. I don't have any sway over what CoinDesk does to my work. CoinDesk is one of the most read websites on the internet. I don't have any sway there. So that's why I continue to do stuff like my own newsletter where there's no editor, where I have typos, where I have whatever, where I run my mouth in ways I probably shouldn't. So these things are, these things are important. So find multiple outlets. It's important to sort of keep that stuff out, to have your own, this is what you do for pleasure, this is what you do professionally. I know that was probably a lot. The one thing I will show you just quickly, if you are writing news, so let me just bring up a quick Forbes piece. You want everything, I would just say another thing to keep in mind, digestible and clean is really like two of the big ones. So this is, I just wrote a piece on the circular economies in Suriname. So with these, Forbes is like the worst website for this stuff. But again, so like just to go through, like just to show it. So first paragraph, one sentence. Next paragraph, I think, is just one sentence as well, or two sentences, right? And here I kind of broke my rule a little bit in each section. I try to just have maybe like I said, 3. So here it's a little bit longer. I have 4 actual paragraphs, and then we break into our first S2. So Bitcoin Stranon. That's the H2 for people who are confused. It's the the subheading, and then we break it down. But the one thing I would say, especially if you're doing any sort of reporting, Or if you're even doing how-to stuff, it's like explain, provide evidence. Explain, provide evidence. That's it. Like if you have to really do one thing, analysis obviously can be in there as well. But with anything, whether it's how-to, whether it's reporting, don't make it too complicated. Make a statement, back it up with evidence. Or if you're explaining something in a how-to guide, back it up with a picture, right? Just keep this as basic as possible. The internet is just not the same sort of place where people who go down to who sit down on a beach chair to read a novel, it's not the same sort of reading experience. The digestibility part, making it easy for people to digest, especially on something like this, where you have a website like this that has 6,000 ads running, you sort of want to keep it, not make people sort of lifting as much as possible. A last thing that I'll say is that when you do write something, if you approach other people to try to get backlinks, so for example, I used to write for NASDAQ, popular website in the United States, and the reason that NASDAQ would let us write for them, we would do it for free, so we gave them free content, but we got a backlink. So I would write a Finder page on how to use this Bitcoin wallet, and then I would write about how I used that wallet or a story about that wallet. The backlink sends a signal to Google that now this Finder page is more important because NASDAQ published it. The inverse is also true. When you put links into your pieces, the more high quality the pages are, the better your page will perform as well. So Me Premier Bitcoin, pretty respected website. So the Lightning Network, this is an internal link. This is another Forbes piece on the Lightning Network. BTC Map, another good link. You don't want to put in Joe's blog. It doesn't look good to Google if you don't really have really good links there. I want to stop just in case I'm over time here, and I apologize, and also for questions or anything. Again, that was a really, really broad overview. What I will say very quickly, if you want to write it down, the easiest way for me to share this with you is if you just subscribe to the newsletter. It's free, frank.corva.substack.com. I will share a link to this in there so that you can actually dive into each of the pieces to see examples. I don't have the time to do that here today. But I want to say thank you all for listening to this. I hope it wasn't too much information, and I hope that it was practical and that you can apply it to whatever form of writing you do online. Yeah. If we have time for questions or if anyone has questions, happy to answer. Yeah. Regarding things regarding things like style and how to do this, it just takes time. I was not good at doing this when I started. You just do it over and over, and it takes time. Everyone at Bitcoin Magazine, we all edit each other's work at Bitcoin Magazine. We all write differently. So there's no one perfect way to do any of this stuff. But again, if you're looking for a rule of thumb, think about Azteco. Go back to an Azteco ad, simple. Make it really direct, really simple. Azteco's not getting into the theory of money or the whatever of Austrian economics. They make it as simple as possible for people to understand, and I would say start with that approach when you get into this space. So that's it. Thank you guys again.